Thank you very much for taking your time. The band has to leave at 7 sharp since you were going to give a show tonight.
Yeah.
And there will be a cab waiting. But I have organized with the library here that there will be room at the end of this artist talk to interaction with the audience.
Okay, all right, sure.
But I would like to ask you, or maybe Randy Road. Here you are, very good. There's a lot of video clips on the residence homepage these days called Randyland, or In My Room.
Right.
And as always, when it comes to the residence, there are lots of good stories and anecdotes, and many stories and anecdote ends with, I have a plan, or something like that.
Yeah, of course.
And one thing I would love to clarify here is there's a scary and sad story about the dog that was killed by a 3-toe Bigfoot way back in the childhood of Randy Rose.
Right, that was Randy's pet dog, Sniffy.
Right. It was the dog Snippy.
Right, indeed.
And there's a photo album with the mother of Randy, and also there are some hair from this creature.
Right.
Now, I've only seen 2 episodes, but what will they be able to get in touch with this 3-toe Bigfoot, and how will it end? Because it's a cliffhanger. They're going into a park in Louisiana, obviously a park being owned by the Marx Brothers.
Right. The park is actually in Southern California.
Okay.
It's an old estate near the Angeles National Forest, and Randy has become convinced that Bigfoot is in this forest, and he's gone on a Bigfoot expedition to find Bigfoot there, and all of the episodes have not been shown yet, but Randy did have a Bigfoot sighting near the Cobb Estate, and that will be on one of the later episodes.
And you gathered a group of 3-toe Bigfoot hunters, so you are ready to go hunting.
Well, Randy was not so successful in terms of actually finding a huge expedition of 3-toed Bigfoot experts. It was kind of a difficult thing. Randy didn't have as much of a budget as he wanted for this, so he wound up just going with his friend Schooner to help him. And so they had an expedition, but unfortunately Schooner was not terribly comfortable with the expedition. It only lasted for 1 day. But they did have a Bigfoot sighting.
Good, good. So we will have to keep watching the Randyland and to see what is happening. The reason why I'm asking about this is that it is a beautiful example of the storytelling that seems to be so much a part of whatever the residence has been doing since day one. But also, to me, it's a new thing that suddenly there's a focus on Randy. There's a focus on the Randy, his home, the storytelling about the recording studio, the living room, all the things that happened there. I saw somewhere that there was a journalist who mentioned that was a change in the setup of the residence. Suddenly, instead of being this art collective universe, suddenly one of the characters got its own role.
Well, this is actually what Randy, Chuck, and Bob is about. Randy, Chuck, and Bob is sort of a way of creating more personalities behind the faceless facade of the residence. And I think what happened was the group really started to feel that sort of like faceless entity that they had always been. They started feeling like in the era of the internet and social media, it seemed a little old-fashioned. And while they liked that, it was always something very important to them, they also felt like they needed to upgrade their public image in a way. And that was why we had Randy, Chuck, and Bob. but also in addition to Randy doing Randyland, you also have Chuck, who is putting out solo albums as Charles Bobuck. So you have another wrinkle in the fabric of this change that's currently happening with the Residents. So
there was an American journalist, I think, who said that this was the kind of the perestroika of the Residents. You know, maybe the word is too big, but there was the feeling of a reconstruction inside the Residents.
In a way, it is a reconstruction, absolutely. Reinvention, reconstruction, rethinking.
In these clips, Randyland or In My Room, there are millions of props. There are millions of things made. So in many ways, these very short video clips, 3, 4, 5 minutes, show some of the elements also that has always been part of the Residents, like this story about the 3-2 Bigfoot.
Right.
It starts with Randy going into the attic, and here is this photo album, and it's there, and the hair is there. So sometimes I'm wondering, how many people are you in order to do all this? Because it takes a lot of time to build not only the stories, you can make them up. Right. We are sitting at the table at the candlelight, but to do the props, to make the photos of the mother, put the hair in an envelope, bring it all into the attic.
Well, you know, there's not really a huge group, but the Residents have a lot of support. There are a lot of people that are, you know, emotionally involved with the Residents. And one of the primary people right now is Don Hardy, the filmmaker who made Theory of Obscurity about the Residents. And Don became so enamored with the Residents, and particularly with Randy, that Don volunteered to be the cameraman and be primarily the production staff in order to do that. And it wouldn't have been happening without him. And Don has other colleagues. When the Bigfoot expedition happened, you know, there were 2 other cameramen and the whole crew, to some extent, going out to film, to video Randy's expedition for Bigfoot in the Cobb Estate. So there are a lot of volunteers, people that get involved in it too.
So in many ways, when I've been thinking of what I would love to have a conversation with you about, I was thinking, you know, way back in the 60s in New York, you had Andy Warhol and you had the factory. Andy Warhol was not the Resident. He was a man that was, you know, open. We could read about him. But in some ways, I see that the Residents are taken off in this factory thing, that you have an open space for creative personalities having an interest in going along with your visions.
I think that's true. I think that's true. The Residents have always been not only very open to collaborating with other people, but also giving those people a lot of creative room for their own vision within the world of the Residents. And there have been a lot of people that I've spoken to over the years that have said, you know, working with the Residents has been one of the most satisfying things for them because it was so open creatively in terms of what opportunities were offered to them.
But if that is the case, and I'm sure it is the case because I've met great many people who have been working with you, it is a miracle in some ways that nobody has said, you know, the Residents, oh, this is this guy or that guy, and it kind of revealed the obscurity, the whole setup. I was doing an interview with British drummer Chris Cutler back in his living room, and he has been working with you in the 70s, and suddenly in the middle of the interview he said, do you want to know who the Residents are? And I was just thinking for 10 seconds, and I said, no, I don't want to know it, because the fun is...
Right, exactly. It's like a little kid with Santa Claus or something, or a magician. If you have a magician doing a trick, as soon as you find out what the trick is, it's not very interesting anymore. And it's the same with the Residents. But what the Residents do, I mean, from the outside, people see the residence as kind of a wall, kind of a faceless, anonymous entity. But when someone starts to work with the residents, that the circle that they draw, they expand to include the people that they're working with. So all of a sudden, that person becomes a resident too. So you're not just protecting their secrets, you're protecting everybody's secrets. So it's a very inclusive thing in that way.
You mentioned the movie, Don Hardy's movie, Theory of Obscurity. It has been shown twice in Copenhagen in connection with the festival early on in the winter. But of course, we have to talk about this theory, because there's a couple of theories that you have been working within a framework that has been, you have set up. This theory of obscurity, who imposed that to the way you have been working?
Well, it's not so much a matter of imposed as a matter of it being suggested. And, you know, from the point of view of the residents' mythology, their earliest mentor was an even more mysterious figure called the Mysterious Ensenada. And he was brought to them with Philip Lithman, Snakefinger, their guitarist. The two of them showed up at the same time. And the Mysterious Ensenada had this idea, this concept, that artists do their best work when they're obscure, when they're free from the expectation of their audience, critics, peers. They're obscure, they're purely in a position to be able to do what feels most right and correct and pure for them. And that's really the theory of obscurity, kind of in a nutshell. Really, the theory of obscurity is not so valid for the residents anymore. I mean, you know, if the residents can sit in here in a place like this and a lot of people will come in and see them, well, they're obviously not completely obscure.
Well, it's like the album Not Available. I mean, it was called Not Available, but it got available. So there's always been this kind of play with the theory, and then suddenly somebody was breaking the rules. And But in relation to this theory of obscurity, of course, it has been a really good marketing tool. It's a great sales point. But what has it actually meant to you as an artist? Do you think it has given you an artistic freedom that you would not have seen in any other collaboration between artists?
Are you referring specifically to the theory of obscurity?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that was probably true initially, but the thing is, if you look at the residents, well, then it's almost like each one of them operates within their own theory of obscurity. And the group operates within its own theory of obscurity, because nobody knows who they are. If the masks come off, nobody gets recognized. So each one then becomes obscure in that way, or is obscure in that way, and then consequently they are really free within that cloud of obscurity to interact and work and create however they want. So I think there's a lot of freedom that has gone with that.
Many years ago in 1978, I visited your then studio and office in 444 Grove Street.
Yeah, right.
I did an interview with Jay Clem.
Okay.
And when we were talking about the theory of obscurity, he mentioned one thing that was maybe just a tiny detail, but nevertheless, he said, you know, one thing is that the residents can go everywhere. They can go to every show, and nobody knows who they are. They can kind of interact with any scene and grab or let go.
Right.
So that has been the value for you, or you?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's like, you know, in a certain sense, without the costumes, there are no residents. You know, they only are personified within the costumes, and really on stage or in a very stylized context like this.
You were talking about the Mysterious Ensenada, and again, when I was visiting Jay Clem, did an interview, that was the big thing. The Eskimo album was in the can, and he was telling amazing stories about Ensenada, going to Greenland, and of course it's interesting for us being in Denmark.
Sure.
Greenland is part of the Danish kingdom. to get more details into the story, because what I was told by J. Clem was that Ensenada went there, disappeared in the cold air, but he reached to send some tapes with some women doing drumming and chanting.
Well, that's basically the story. The mysterious Ensenada was always a sort of a ethnicologist, you know, into various ethnic music, and as ethnic music, world music, became more and more popular, he began seeking more and more things that had had little or no exposure. And at some point, he became very obsessed with Inuit or Eskimo culture. And I think his approach was to go through North America and go up to Alaska. And I think it was really the polar Eskimos, the ones that lived their entire lives upon the polar ice cap, which seemed to be the purest culture, the most removed culture, was the thing that was the most intriguing to him. And ultimately, the residents did receive some tapes from him. The tapes were, shall we say, very obscure. And they then used these tapes as inspiration to create the Eskimo album. Although if you listen to those tapes, you wouldn't really hear anything that sounded like Eskimo. It was purely inspiration.
But there was a lot of good stories, even in the telling from J. Clem. You should also have received some containers containing cold air from Greenland, and a lot of good stuff. But my main question in a way is, it is fantastic that this was in 78 and now we are in 2016, and the mythology and the storytelling is so consistent. How have you been able to keep the history so consistent? I mean, you have been interviewed tons of times, and I'm sure that telling good stories, you would make detours and additions, but more or less listening to you, it's like listening to J. Clem way back in San Francisco, 78.
Yeah. So how has there been a consistent through line?
Yeah.
With all that?
Yeah.
I guess we're very good at remembering our own stories.
But I guess you do a lot of writing.
Well, yeah, there's a pretty good bit of writing done, but most of the writing is actually done within the context of residence projects. I mean, which is very different than what's going on right now, or what goes on in most kind of like interview or promotional contexts.
So, you have not made the residence story handbook to kind of double check all the mythologies and stories being told?
No, not really. Not really. I mean, you know, in some ways I sort of suspect that will happen someday. You know, for myself, I don't really keep journals, but a lot of everyday business work that I do, and not just business work, interaction. You know, I have a series of yellow legal tablets that I take notes on. And I save all those tablets. When I finish a tablet, I put it in a box and I date it. And if I finish another one, I put it in the box and I date it. And it's very interesting to me how I can go back and look at those tablets from 20, 30 years ago, and it can refresh my memory in a very strong way. And someday I have thought, well, you know, when all this is in history, I might like to go back and try to create a definitive history of the residence. And that may happen, but right now it's too exciting to continue to develop the present and the future.
But in that sense also, there are similarities to the visions of Andy Warhol. He also documented everything and seen from my end of the world, from kind of the art interest. He had all these photographers and camera people, and he kept his diaries and things. So there are some interesting links there, this lost documentary thing. And looking at Randyland, whether it's props or not, but the studio, the living room, all the boxes, if that belongs to any living person, it seems as if some of you are really a serious collector?
Well, there's definitely a serious archive there. And, I'm the person that's done most of the artwork for the residents over the years. I've done almost all the album covers. I've done most of the group photography. I've been an art director on a lot of the videos. And so I've maintained a collection of most of the artwork that I have created for the residents. I mean, at this point in time, it sort of neatly breaks down into two 20-year eras. The first era from the early 70s through the early to mid 90s was all analog. And so all that exists as physical pieces of art. From roughly the mid 90s to now is the digital era, and that exists on a bunch of hard drives and CDRs and DVD-Rs. And I'm actually negotiating with the Museum of Modern Art in New York now to turn a lot of that archive over to them.
Yeah, because they got some of your early videotapes because you were regarded as being pioneers in making rock videos.
Right. Yeah, so they have some of the earliest one. The earliest one was the Third Reich and Roll, where the residents are all in newspaper suits looking kind of like Ku Klux Klan. And that's in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. The 1-minute movies that they did for the commercial album in 1980, that's in the permanent collection there. So yeah, the Museum of Modern Art has been very good to the residents.
But that brings us into the whole thing about technology, and then we can return to the storytelling, because you have been really, really progressive in using new technology all the way through, from your first movie back in the early 70s, then making tape manipulations in the studio, and then you were doing nearly any kind of digital format that has appeared, Laserdisc, CD-ROM, games. Who has the main interest there? Is that also you being the kind of art director, or is it also, again, in a collaboration with supporters or artists from the outside coming to you saying, hey, there's a new feature, the Laserdisc, could we do things there together? Or
It's really a combination of all those things. I mean, there's so much stuff has happened over 40 plus years that all these things have developed or evolved from relationships, really. Some of these relationships come from the outside. Some of the relationships happen within the residence. There is a guy that I made friends with 30 years ago named Michael Nash, and he was a curator of videos at in a museum in Salt Lake City. He then went to another museum, Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. Then he went to the Long Beach Museum of Art. And then at that point, he went to work for the Voyager company that was doing Laserdiscs. Well, my relationship with him was the reason why the residents did a Laserdisc. And then continuing to work with Voyager, that was the reason why the Freak Show CD-ROM was done. So that's just one example of how relationships have influenced the development of the residents. But then an idea from these things will come within the group, and then all these ideas will start bouncing back and forth within the group, and that's ultimately what creates the product. There was another guy named Jim Ludke. Jim Ludke was the primary artist on Freak Show CD-ROM and Bad Day on the Midway CD-ROM. And it was the connection with him really that made those happen, because he's the person that had the vision and the technical ability to realize the artwork that allowed those things to happen.
Some of the artworks you have been doing has been very, very popular. Returning to the Eskimo album, I guess that was where, in that period, the eyeball thing was introduced at the first time.
Right.
Well, there was an interview with you recently in a magazine in Australia, where you were, I think it was Australia, could be New Zealand, but anyway, on a country where you're going to further on in this tour.
Right.
And then you were talking about that this very, very strong visual image nearly took over. I mean, you were kind of I got the impression that you were kind of stuck in the image. It was very hard for you to move out.
Yeah, well, the residents originally intended that each time they did a new project, they would have a new faceless image of some kind. And if you look back historically, particularly at the 70s, what you see is you see the newspaper suits, you see asbestos suits. There's another one where they have kind of a rectangular box shape over their head, which indeed actually was boxes that 7-inch records came in. So when it came to Eskimo, they felt like this was a very important project, and they wanted something really new and really different. And their original idea was to create this like a silver ball, kind of like a Christmas tree ornament or something. So it was going to be the same, you know, tuxedos with a silver ball with a top hat on it. And so I had the job of going to Los Angeles and meeting with costume makers to get these made. And I met with several people, and all of them said, well, you can't do that. What'll happen is it'll fog up on the inside and you can't see, and it'll be hard to breathe in there and people can't hear. And it's like, okay, well, I guess that's true. So I went back and took that information back to the residents. And so at that point, the eyeball came up. And so there's still difficulties with the eyeball in terms of seeing and hearing and breathing, but at least with the eyeball, there is a little bit of a hole in the front, you know, with black cloth over it. So you can see through a little porthole like that. You know, you can hear some. I mean, the image was so strong and so readily accepted by people that people have always thought that the residents wore these eyeballs in concert. Nobody could play an instrument wearing those things. I mean, it's interesting how pervasive the image of a band playing with eyeball heads is. But for the most part, it never really happened except in very small, they might play one song like that just for the effect of it. But it was just completely impractical from a performance point of view.
But what was they made of when you finally made them for photo sessions and for this one song? What are they made of? I've never touched one, so I have no clue.
They're made out of a kind of hard rubber.
Ah, okay.
It's called neoprene.
Okay. Ah, okay.
And these were made by a guy. I mean, if you see the film, the guy who made the original eyeballs, his name was Mark Siegel. And somebody just directed me to Mark in Los Angeles back in, I guess, 1978. And he was working on a TV program called Battlestar Galactica. And he was just a great guy, completely bored. And I came to him with this eyeball idea, and he completely lit up. And so he made the original ones. But the whole idea of escaping from the image of the eyeball or escaping from them became something the residents really wanted to get away from. But they kind of kept coming back. When I spoke of the CD-ROM era, the Freak Show CD-ROM and Bad Day in the Midway CD-ROM, at that point we created relationships with several new companies. Well, these companies wanted the eyeballs to use to promote those releases. And the original eyeballs were in such sad shape at that point that we had brand new ones made. And so I went to the same guy, Mark Siegel, who actually, at that time, the second time when I found Mark, he was working for Industrial Light and Magic, you know, George Lucas's special effects company in the Bay Area. And so Mark by that time had become a digital model maker. And he really didn't want to work with those kind of like toxic chemicals anymore, but he still supervised and found a team of people to make the new eyeballs. And he's somebody, I mean, if you see the movie, he's in the movie. He's actually, my wife also works for ILM, and she and Mark became good friends, and he and I are still friends.
And it is a strong image. If anybody turns on the light, we don't do it now, you will see many, many T-shirts with the eyeball.
Oh, the eyeball,
course.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, because it is really strong. But as you mentioned, you have been doing so many other things, and nearly every project you have been doing has been different. When I visited your office in Grove Street way back in '78, and talking to Jay Clem, he mentioned that at a certain point at the mid-'70s, you realized that you have to separate the art from the art business in order to keep the residents going.
Right.
Was that because of the Vilnius Fats movie that cost too much, or what was the point where you realized that you had to split these things?
Well, it was a complicated situation, and part of it was that there was increasing pressure on the residents to be commercial, and the Cryptic Corporation and the residents wanted to keep the residents working under the theory of obscurity, or to keep them as pure as possible for as long as possible. So the whole idea was really to create Ralph Records as a label that could work with more commercial acts, and hopefully the money that could be made from selling these records could then be used to support the residents and keep them making their own particular artwork, or keep a certain purity for that artwork. And this was a very nice idea. It also failed. What we did not take into account was, even though the residents' music was very uncommercial, the residents themselves and us as the Cryptic Corporation, as the people who marketed them, did such a good job of creating a compelling image around them that their stuff actually sold fairly well. Whereas the other people that we signed to Ralph Records, like Tuxedo Moon, MX80 Sound, and Snakefinger, while their music was superficially more commercial, they didn't sell as well as the residents. And because from a business point of view, those people had to be supported. They had to be paid artist royalties. Not as much money came back from those records as came back from the residents, where everything went to the residents and the Cryptic Corporation. So it was an interesting experiment for a while, but ultimately not a successful one.
So now the Cryptic Corporation is only dealing with the residents.
Correct.
And yeah.
Correct.
But you mentioning Ralph Records, and instantly it was some kind of a success, but I think that it took off in Europe before it took off in America.
It did. I mean, that really was due to there was the British music press. I assume it still is. At that time, it was hugely influential all over the world, but particularly in Europe. And there was a writer, I think his name was John Savage.
Yes.
And he published 3 reviews all at once. And it was for Meet the Residents, Third Reich and Roll, and Fingerprints. And it was like 2 5-stars and a 4-star review. And, at the time that happened, the Residents had released those 3 albums. Okay, these were being produced in small quantities. Meet the Residents was done 1,000. Third Reich and Roll was 1,000 were pressed. By the time it came, it was time to produce press Fingerprints. The Residents had a room in their studio that had 700 or 800 Meet the Residents in it, 700 or 800 Third Reich and Rolls. It didn't make much sense to do another 1,000 Fingerprints, so only 500 Fingerprints were pressed. But as soon as those reviews were out, it's like the records just started flying out the door. And that's kind of the point where everything changed.
And it's interesting to see what happened in Europe, because like we have mentioned Chris Cutler earlier on with his recommended records, he was really interested in working with you, even though the whole setup of his was very much political. It was rock and opposition, but meant in a political way. But I don't think that you have ever regarded yourself as a political band.
No, the Residents have never seen them. I mean, there are certain things that they have done that could be seen as having political content, but never overtly.
The Mool trilogy could be political battles between two systems, and
yeah, well, that's certainly that aspect of it, and I think that had to do with conflict within the Residents. In terms of, at that time, they were starting to work with a very big management group in LA, and so there was a conflict between how much they wanted to embrace the idea of being exposed in a broader way through this LA management and how much they wanted to stay within more underground. And, you know, their Wormwood album, which is all about the Bible, that was a time when the religious right was making a lot of political noise in the United States, and they were certainly not in support of this. And while the Residents don't have a lot of beliefs around religion and Christianity one way or the other, they kind of felt that the religious right was kind of cherry picking the parts of the Bible that they felt like supported their message of, you know, anti-homosexuality and anti-abortion, and, you know, whereas the Residents were well aware that the Bible is much more interesting than that. And so they went in and they found the stories that the religious right did not want to be exposed, and they started working their material around that. So like I said, there was nothing very deliberately political, but that was certainly an aspect of that project.
But that was later on than when the Residents and Rev Records kind of made a breakthrough in Europe. But maybe also, I'm sure that some of us saw the Residents as in some ways part of the punk movie, even though you were not a punk band, but you had this do-it-yourself attitude, and you have been able to keep that, listening to you, with having management that are not among the 1, 2, 3 top management in LA, but you keep an underground network.
Sure.
So in that sense, you hit a movement in Europe, the beginning of the do-it-yourself movement, very strongly.
Yeah, it's like, you know, parallel to the punk movement of the kind of late 70s was something that was called New Wave. And so punk and New Wave were in some ways kind of interchangeable, but punk was New Wave was a much broader term. And so while the Residents certainly never saw themselves as punk, and really not New Wave either, we sort of embraced that from a PR point of view, a marketing point of view, because it made sense to attach them to something that was popular at the time. And once again, while the Residents were never really a punk band, their Satisfaction is considered to be a seminal work of punk. And there was a writer for the San Francisco Chronicle that when he heard Satisfaction, and this was a year or two before any punk stuff existed, he referred to it as the most determinedly repellent music ever recorded. Residents were always proud of that.
Was that the guy you locked in a motel for 6 days?
No, that was a different person, a different one. Yeah.
Because that was one of the Cryptic Corporation marketing tricks, that you hired a juggler, a journalist, and you forced him to be locked in a motel room for 6 days.
Yeah, this was actually a guy named Penn Jillette, and Penn Jillette and his partner Teller, you know, they are at least in the States a very famous team of magicians, Penn and Teller, who have been working at one hotel in Las Vegas for 14 years now, and recently had their show on Broadway in New York. But at that time, they were fairly obscure. And when it came time for the Residents to do their Mole show, they chose Penn Jillette because the residents did not want to speak any more than they speak now, you know, I'm sort of being their mouthpiece now. Okay, well, Penn Jillette was their mouthpiece in the Mole Show. And so he did the whole tour with them and has remained friends ever since. But the piece that you're talking about, I think that was a couple of years before the Mole Show.
All right. I think it was celebrating your 10 years anniversary, and he was locked in the room with your whole production. Yeah. And on different places at the internet, you can hear him give comments, and he's not a huge fan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jan, we only have 10 minutes left now, so maybe we should move on to questions from the audience.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we will have to see each other some other time because there are so many stories.
Yeah,
we haven't reached.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a microphone somewhere, and please.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to Denmark.
Yeah.
This is like an immense body of work behind the residents. Almost impossible to keep track on. You've been dealing with various issues, religion, shamanism. I read somewhere that Demon Stands Alone was written in the weeks after 9/11. And I've been wondering, since the residents are still producing so much in these days, is there some sense of artistic urgency going on? Could you elaborate on that? You said that you're not an overtly political band, but is there like philosophical, psychological aspects that you could delve into?
Well, I don't know that there is an overt sense of urgency. I mean, the residents are still being very creative and enjoying that creativity. And, you know, obviously they've been doing this for a long time. They're getting older. So I think in some ways they definitely are aware that they're closer to the end of their careers than the beginning. So I think there are things that they feel like they still haven't said yet. The residents have always wanted to do a film, and so they're looking to make contacts. They have a script right now for a film that would take the original material that they did in Violence Fats and recontextualize it into a brand new contemporary story. And that's a project they're very excited about. But, you know, as much of enablers as the Cryptic Corporation is, we don't really quite have the deep pockets to be able to finance a film. So we're trying to find ways to get that done. But I don't know if this answers your question or not, but the residents still are finding new horizons to climb, and that's exciting.
Probably. Wasn't a clear question either.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Any other questions? There's one down there.
As a non-English speaker, it was a bit difficult to really clarify what was happening when Charles announced that he left the band for good, sort of. Is there any kind of bad feelings between Randy and Chuck?
No, I don't think there are any bad feelings. I think, to be honest, I think there's a little uncertainty exactly as to what motivated this decision from him at this time. But I mean, I've spoken to him, and you know, while once again there is a lot of creative energy moving forward with the residents, at this point in time, he kind of feels like he's done what he set out to do, and wants to just kind of relax and enjoy his life. And I think most people can understand that. But there's not really any bad feelings between him and Randy or anybody else.
And he's back at a chicken farm, you said, when you were talking about this incident after the South by Southwest festival.
Right.
Right. And he's happy taking care of chickens.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit more of a metaphorical chicken farm than real. concrete thing with birds running around, you know, muck, 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 like that. But
Good. I just wanted to be sure that he was a happy man. Any other questions? There's one further down or nearly at the back.
I tend to write morbid music myself, and I've not heard that much of the Residents. I heard Boots and Kill Him and all that, and I just want to hear if there's ever, if you ever feel that there's a line that you have, stepped over with yourself, where you feel, I went too far there. Do you ever had that feeling?
I think the question is do I or the Residents feel like there was ever a point where they went too far with their art? They took it too far and stepped over a line in a way of some kind?
In which way?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think, one of their more extreme projects was God in Three Persons. And there is certainly a point at the climax of this album where the imagery gets extremely grotesque. And I think at the time that they were doing it, they were kind of going, well, maybe this is going too far. I don't know. But at the same now, I think that album was done in 1988. Over time, that has felt like a very good decision. And another of the projects that we are trying to realize for the Residents right now is a theater piece based on God in Three Persons. And a lot of the subtext of God in Three Persons is kind of the fluid nature of gender. And at least in the United States, and I would assume probably here too, there's a lot of lively discussion these days about gender and the fluid nature of gender. And in many ways, this piece that was done in 1988, in some ways it feels like it's as timely now, if not more so than it was then.
And without going into the gender discussion, the character of Randy is not a very nice person in some ways. Again, if you're looking again, if you're looking into some of the Randyland, there's one clip where you invite some fans from Europe to play a poker game with the dog masks on. Yeah. And suddenly Randy is tearing off one of the guys' mask and forces him to eat a obviously poisoned popcorn. And he faints or puke or whatever and is rolled out of the studio. It's not a very nice gesture to a guy who's running a museum in Bremerhaven. Eyeball museum with, I've been told, 100,000 resident artifacts.
Well, Randy didn't know the guy was going to choke on tortilla chips. I mean, the guys from Germany, Randy's going to give him a real treat. He's giving him tortilla chips with genuine salsa on them.
I couldn't wait seeing the following episode, but there was no news about the cure of this poor German guy. So
go to Bremerhaven. You can find out.
Yeah. Any more questions? Because I think that we might have maybe 1 or 2 minutes more. One of the statements I really, really love from the Residents is this. It was an insert in the Eskimo album, and it's called "Ignorance of your culture is not considered cool," and that's maybe to me one of the real headlines of what you have been doing in the Residents, because culture, whether it was trash or high culture or low culture, has always been on the table in this strange artistic blender of the Residents and the team. Was that something you were thinking of in that relation, in the relation of the oeuvre of the Residents?
Well, I think you're right in that the Residents have always been conscious of culture. They've always been conscious of it. They've always been conscious of the fact that they had a place within it, even though that place was sometimes fairly obscure. honestly, this was a long time ago. I can't tell you exactly why this statement was created, but there was never any problem embracing it.
No, because I mean, you have been doing so many things, and we don't have the time to talk about all the things. But then when I found this in the Eskimo album, it was just an insert. I thought, well, you want to read it? All right. and you can see it too, you know it. Then I thought, well, if I should put some kind of label on some of your doings from an artistic point of view, this is something that gives meaning to me, because you have always been in forefront with the technology. You have been, even though you were in forefront, you were looking back and you were grabbing, stealing from all kind of American popular culture. Somebody tried to make a movie. I stole this riff from Tim Buckley. Yeah. So there's this, you have been stealing, but in that sense you have been postmodernistic before postmodernism was a hit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fine line between stealing and influence,
That is very true.
And the residents have never had any problem crossing that line.
So, what can we say more than keep going? It's been a pleasure. Yeah. And then I think, yes, we maybe should let the residents leave the room first.
Okay.
And maybe somebody can be sure that nobody is falling over the platform. So, see you at Amager Bio tonight, where you're going to perform the third part of your trilogy,
Shadowland. Yes. Part 3 of the Randy, Chuck, and Bob trilogy. Yes.
Yes. And it was a pleasure talking to you. So hopefully we will meet some other time.
Yeah.
With or without candles.
Pleasure's mine. Yeah.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Good luck.
Yeah.
And